No, I'm good. Thank you. All right, let's gather back in and we'll get started. Two more to go. So we're halfway done with the morning, 2/3 of the way done with the seminar. Anybody pick up any books out there? I know we have a couple people that grabbed something. Yep, good, good. I usually go to things like this. I used to go, and I'd just buy so many books, and then come home and trying to get them on a plane or whatever is such a pain. And now I just take pictures of all the books I want, and then when I get back, I just order it on Amazon and it comes right in. So in this session, and we'll start here in a few minutes, but in this session, as we deal with resolving conflict, there are some, it was hard for me to know what to put on for you guys to fill out. I tend to like a lot of blanks because I can kind of actively, keep going, and it's a good reminder later because there's so much information, and so I like to do a lot of blanks, and I think this particular talk is more than any other because I couldn't figure out what to take out. And so we'll just work through that, and together I think it'll work out fine. All right, let's get started. God's design for resolving conflict. So have you ever had this totally normal day, and everything's going fine, and then all of a sudden your spouse says something or you say something and nothing is the same the rest of the day? I mean, it went from this beautiful day to dark clouds, hurricane, in just seconds. And you go, what in the world? How did we go from this great thing to nothing? And so that's what we're going to deal with today is how do we resolve conflict? How do we fight fair? How do we work through things? How do we speak to each other like adults? How do I get my word across without being taken wrong? Well, that's this session, and it's one of my favorite sessions to work through. If you go to any biblical counseling conference, you'll hear this in the communication and conflict resolution teaching. And so if you're taking notes, we're going to first talk about the power of our words. Proverbs 12 speaks about this. Verse 18, it says, speaking recklessly is like the thrust of a sword, but the words of the wise bring healing. Well, that word recklessly is the same word that you would use, or same word that we have for thoughtless, which is simply saying thoughtless words are equivalent to being stabbed. There are some words that we say that we don't think about before we say them. And then those reckless words or those thoughtless words are comparable to being stabbed by the sword. And so what's the solution? Back in the day when the church I was at before this, there was a radio station that was part of our church. And they would take questions, from the public, but there was a 7-second delay. And so sometimes somebody would come on and they'd call into the radio show, a live radio show, and man, they just start cussing out the pastor or whatever. And they'd say, okay, we have a caller on line 1. Joe, what do you have for us today? What kind of question do you have for today? And then you hear, lost Joe. Not sure what happened there, Joe. And I think, man, wouldn't it be nice if you just had a 7-second delay? Because there's been things that you say, and as soon as you say it, you go, oh, no. Nothing's going to be the same now. Can't believe I just said that. Just lost Joe. Not sure what happened there. So they're thoughtless words. Thoughtless words are equivalent to being stabbed, whereas wise words bring healing. And so there's no quick fix to getting stabbed, but wise words get the healing started. My dad, he used to use the term, when somebody would die, he would say, they forgot to breathe. And I'd say, well, Dad, how'd so-and-so die? Oh, he forgot to breathe. So as a kid growing up, I was so fearful that one day I'm going to forget to breathe. And so I remember when Elvis died, I'm sharing my age here a little bit, but I remember Elvis died, and I went by the newspaper stand, and I looked in there, and it said, the king is dead, and then I read the little notes on it, and he died from a drug overdose. Well, as far as I was concerned, Elvis was the first person to ever die that didn't forget to breathe. And so I went home, and I told my dad, I said, did you hear that Elvis died? And he said, yeah, I did. And I said, did you hear how he died? I was so excited. And my dad said, yeah, he forgot to breathe. And I said, no, he died from a drug overdose. And he said, yeah, he had so many drugs in him, he forgot to breathe. And I was so angry. I'm like, no, that's not true. And I just swore I would never say that to my kids. Well, don't you know? I was talking to one of my kids one day, and they said, did you hear so-and-so died? I said, yeah. And he said, did you hear how he died? And I said, yeah. Forgot to breathe. It's just words, huh? You ever listen to your kids and hear them talk to each other and realize they say the exact same things you do in the same exact way that you say them? Don't you wonder, what our kids are going to say about us? You remember when Dad used to always say? Remember when Mom used to always say this? So the mouth and our tongue is so powerful that it can affect destinies, and that's what James talks about. Burning words determine the course of our lives. Burning words determine the course of our lives. Look at James 3. It says, so also the tongue is a small part of the body, and yet it boasts of great things. Behold, how great a forest is set aflame by such a small fire, and the tongue is a fire. The very world of iniquity, the tongue, is set among our members as that which defiles the entire body, sets on fire the course of our life, and is set on fire by hell. That's our tongues. One spark can start a forest fire, and one word can either encourage or destroy. And I would say this, a fire destroys houses, and our words can destroy homes. And there have been far more homes destroyed by words than houses destroyed by fires. It's in our words. It's in the things that we say. And so edifying words or building words bring grace. We use a technique in biblical counseling that we call remove and replace, or put off and put on. And the idea behind that is that, have you ever, I used to set mobile homes when we were on staff with Campus Crusade and try to earn a little extra money. And sometimes I'd come in after a day of working, and mobile homes, you got to crawl in dirt and dust and grime and sewage and everything else. And so we had to come home, and I'm just filthy dirty. And Sherry'd say, you are not coming in the house looking like that. And so she'd stand out there and just squirt me out, spray me off before I could go into the house. But you come into the house after you've taken off this nasty clothing. You take a shower and you come back. You know that feeling of just that fresh, clean clothing that you wear? That's the same idea. Is you remove one thing and replace it with another. You put off one and put on something else. And so we need to put off words that destroy homes and put on words that build up and encourage. Do we have any occupational therapists in here today? None? Man, I love what they do. And maybe there are other occupations that are similar, but they celebrate achievements, like big and small. They're constantly encouraging. They're constantly building people up. So, you get somebody, let's say, who's had a stroke, and so on their right side of their body, they really, trying to get some kind of manual dexterity back, and it's so difficult. And so they don't say things like, that broken old body ain't never going to work again. It ain't going to be like it used to, right? They say words like, great job picking up that penny. Good job. Hey, he picked up the penny. And everybody's, yay, he picked up the penny. Well, that's the same principle in this text. is remove those words that will discourage and demean and put on words that encourage and build up. And so Ephesians 4:25-32 really covers this. And you can see it in the text. It's really easy as you work through it. And so it's just to put offs and put ons. And so verse 25, it says, therefore, laying aside falsehood, speak truth each one of you with his neighbor, for we are members of one another. So what's the put off and what's the put on there? What do we put off? Falsehood, right? Lying. What do we put on? Truth. Good. So you get the idea, right? Okay. So verse 26, be angry and yet do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger. So what do we put off? No, he says be angry. You don't put off anger here. You put off sin. What do you put on? Anger. Nobody wants to say it, right? Well, we'll talk about what that means here in a few minutes. Verse 27, do not give the devil an opportunity. Whoever steals must steal no longer, but rather he must labor, performing with his own hands what is good, so that he will have something to share with one who has a need. So what do we put off? Stealing. What do we put on? Good. Okay, verse 29, let no unwholesome word proceed from your mouth, but only such a word as is good for edification, according to the need of the moment, so that it will give grace to those who hear. What do we put off? Unwholesome words. What do we put on? No. Words that build, right? Words that encourage. Words that give grace. Verse 30, do not grieve the Holy Spirit of God, by whom you were sealed for the day of redemption. Let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander be put away from you, along with all malice. What do we put off? Bitterness, wrath, anger, clamor, slander, and malice. Verse 32, be kind to one another, tenderhearted, forgiving each other, just as God in Christ also has forgiven you. What do we put on? Kindness, tenderheartedness, forgiveness. And so we're going to work through this particular text here this morning to talk about 4 rules of communication. And so the first one we saw in verse 25 is be honest. Be honest. Put off lying and put off falsehood and put on speaking the truth. Okay, but we have to be really careful with that, because a lot of times we say, well, it's true. So it's not just speaking the truth. Ephesians 4, we are not simply speak the truth. Ephesians 4:15 says we're to speak the truth in love. Speaking truth is the easy part, isn't it? Speaking truth in love can be the harder part. Because to speak the truth, you just say whatever is true. To speak the truth in love, you say it in such a way that you're intentionally trying to build up and encourage and give grace, to edify. And so number 1, we want to be honest. Number 2 is we want to keep current. Keep current. And so the idea here is solve today's problems today, because each day has enough trouble of its own. And unresolved anger often leads to bitterness. It often leads to bitterness. Okay, here's how I think of bitterness. Let's say if we went outside and we had we got a big bonfire. I think it's supposed to be really cold Tuesday or Wednesday or something this week. So we had this big bonfire going, and I don't know, it's 10 feet high. It's a really good bonfire, and flames are climbing up, and you look at your kids and say, listen, you see that fire over there? You stay away from that fire. It's hot. Okay, it's obvious it's hot. Well, as that fire goes down, it doesn't have the big sparks and big flames coming up. It's just got these burning embers. Realistically, you realize it's hotter now than it was when it was shooting up real high. What does it take to get those embers back into a big fire? What do you have to do? I heard somebody say stoke it, right? Kick it, poke it. What else? Add more fuel, put some more wood on there. What else can you do? Fan it, right? Fan the flame, and it'll go up. Listen, that's bitterness. That is bitterness. It's having this normal thing going on. And all of a sudden, somebody says something, and just anger. Here's an example. I was at the Y one day, and one of the ladies, it's probably been 6-7 years ago now, but one of the ladies who was a receptionist there, she was working, and she answers the phone. It's a great day at the YMCA. How can I help you? And the guy on the other end, I mean, I could hear him. He was just going off on her, and he was cussing and yelling, and something about your people didn't treat me right, and I'm supposed to have this, Anyway, she was so kind, so calm, so gentle. She said, "Oh, sir, I am so sorry for what's happened. Please don't cancel your membership, at least without coming and seeing me face to face." And she ended up talking him down. By the time she was off the phone, he's like, "Okay, I'll come. I'll talk to you." Hangs up. Phone rings again. "It's a great day at the YMCA. How can I help you?" "Didn't I tell you don't call me at work?" Click. "Who was that?" "My husband." "What did he want?" "Something about he was getting off early and he was going to make dinner, and I've told him over and over again, do not call me at work." That's bitterness. She said, "He makes me so mad." He didn't make you mad. He just drew out the anger that was already in your heart. Nobody makes you mad. And so I'm thinking, wow, that is bitterness right there. She is so bitter. You know, some people never actually talk through problems. And you know what happens? Bitterness. Bitterness. And so they just don't say anything, right? Well, when you do that, you clam up, and so clamming up gives the devil a foothold. That's what Ephesians 4 says. When people quit talking, the devil is won. But all anger isn't bad, right? I mean, we saw earlier it said that we are commanded to put on anger. Like, well, wait a second. So on one side it says, "Let all wrath and clamor and slander and anger be removed from you." And the other side it says, "Be angry, but don't sin." And so what do? Do we put on anger or do we put off anger? And the answer is yes. We put on anger and we put off anger. I mean, just think about it. Did Jesus ever get angry? Yeah, Jesus was never angry when he was attacked, though. He was only angry with sin. He was never angry when he was personally attacked. And yet our anger is usually when what happens? When we've been attacked, when somebody does something against us. And so why do we put on anger? Is because anger is a God-given emotion intended to help us solve problems quickly and biblically. You ever get so mad that you just go, you know what, let's just deal with it right now. We need to talk about this. So clamming up doesn't help. You know what clamming up does? It brings more bitterness. And it's probably not just us. I think it's you guys as well. Have you ever been really angry and clammed up, and then like 2 weeks later, you're still angry, but you don't remember what you were angry about in the first place? You just know you're mad. And you know, you probably think, and I got a right to be mad, I just don't remember what it is. So what happens is when you have this unresolved anger, it leads to resentment. And when you have resentment, it leads to bitterness. And when you have bitterness, it leads to hatred. And then hatred leads to murder. But the thing is, you're married. Like, you have to be able to talk about hard things. You have to be able to deal with hard things. And I would say this, the vast majority of the people that I counsel, I ask them a question. I said, well, just tell me, in the last 30 years you've been married, give me a few things that you guys, that used to be a problem in your marriage, but they no longer are. That you've actually dealt with it, you've talked about it, you haven't swept things under the rug, you're not bitter about it, but things that used to be a big problem in your marriage and they no longer are, that you guys have dealt with. And I can honestly say the vast majority of the people that I say that to can think of not one thing that they've actually ever worked through. Not one thing that used to be a big deal and it no longer is. And there are always hard things that we talked about. And so what ends up happening is you just put it under the rug and put it under the rug and put it under the rug. Or you blow up so much about it that the other person just says, I'm not going to talk about that. Because every time I talk about that, we got a problem. And so how do you do this? What's the rule for this? And so you want to keep current, right? You want to, what was the first one here? Be honest, keep current. And then number 3 is you attack the problem, not the person. Attack the problem, not the person. This is so important. Listen, if you guys have financial problems, you need to talk about the finances. But you can't start the conversation with, You are so lazy that you won't wake up 5 minutes early to make your own lunch, and so you have to go out and spend money every day for lunch. If you start the conversation that way, it's not going to end well. That's attacking the person, not the problem. And so Ephesians 4:29 says, let no unwholesome word proceed from your mouth, but only such a word as is good for edification, according to the need of the moment, that it may give grace to those who hear. So what we do is in fact, you can finish this sentence if I said this. If you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all, right? That's kind of the idea here, because that would be biblical, right? No. This says, let no unwholesome word proceed from your mouth if you don't have anything nice to say. But then it says, but only such a word as is good for edification according to the need of the moment, so that it may give grace to those who hear. So here's the deal. This is actually saying, if you don't have anything nice to say, find something nice to say and say it. Like that's what your tongue was made for. It was made to build up. It was made to encourage. It was made to make somebody feel like I have been extended grace. If you don't have anything nice to say, find something nice to say and say it. That word unwholesome, it means rotten or unfit for use. Let no rotten or unfit for use word come out of your mouth. And so by the time you get to the end of this really difficult conversation, your spouse should feel like they have been built up and they have been extended grace. That's when you know you've communicated well. And so how can you use your words to build up and encourage? Because that's the purpose of our tongues. Give grace, build up our spouse. I like what Zig Ziglar says, failure is not a person, it's an event. Not a person, it's an event. It's something that happened. And so here's what typical arguments look like. And the funny thing is I've done this diagram in different places in the world, and everybody goes, how do you know we fight like that? We all fight the same way. And so here's the idea, is you have your energy here, and ideally you would want to take your energy and solve problems, right? That's what you want to do. But we don't do that. Usually we take our energy and we either clam up or we blow up. And so let me ask you a question. Who are our clam up people in here? All right? Who are our blow up people in here? Okay. I can kind of go either way, I think, for me. And so the clam up person is somebody you say, well, what's wrong? Nothing. I know something's wrong. What's wrong? Nothing. Okay, listen, I'm going to put my phone down. Let's talk about it. What's wrong? I'm fine. You're not fine. Let's talk about it. Listen, the only thing that's bothering me is you keep asking me what's wrong with me. And then they say, you want to know what's wrong? I'll tell you what's wrong. And they move from clamming up to blowing up, right? You want to know what's wrong? I'll tell you what's wrong. And then they just vomit it all over you. And then they say, conversation over, and then they go back to clamming up. And the one who was clamming up, you know what they say? Oh, no, that conversation ain't over. And so they start blowing up. And you go from blow up to clam up to blow up to clam up to blow up to clam up. Here's the problem. When blowing up's not happening and clamming up's not happening, we actually think that we're okay, but we're not okay. Why? Because we've never actually taken our energy and solved the problem. And so then we get, didn't I tell you don't ever call me at work again? It's just bitterness, and it just builds and builds and builds. And people say, that's how we fight. I know. That's how everybody fights. But how do we actually get past that? We need to attack the problem, not the person. And so here are some general principles for that. To attack the problem and not the person means we're not to just be right. Listen, being right is way overrated. I should know. I'm always right. Being right is way overrated. And so we're not to just be right, and we're also not to just tell the truth. We're to tell the truth in love. The next one, we're not to just win an argument. Listen, I'm a good arguer. I can win battles. I can win an argument even when I'm wrong. If you do that, you may win a battle, but you're going to lose the war. The next one is we're called to a higher calling, and that's to build others up. And the truth is, we hide behind things like it's the truth, or I was right, or I was frustrated. Or here's a good one, I had a bad day. What is you having a bad day? Why does you having a bad day mean that you can vomit on me? And honestly, we do that with our kids. Like, we teach them these things. And so when our kids are bad, you know what we say? They haven't had a nap. It's not what I meant, we'll say that. Actually, you know what Jesus said? The good man out of the good treasure of his heart brings forth what is good, and the evil man out of the evil treasure brings forth what is evil, for his mouth speaks from that which fills his heart. You realize that evil words come from evil hearts? That we can't use the excuse that someone made you mad. That the way we respond is actually our choice. And all that person did is they exposed the part of our hearts that we may not have wanted others to know about. And so this idea isn't about avoiding conflicts, and it's not about avoiding confrontation. It's about how do we speak to one another, and how can we use this conversation to build up and extend grace. I mean, how can we get past the point of just making a point to actually solve problems? How can we use our words, and how can we use our tone of voice to be helpful? Well, we have to put off words that tear down and attack the person. Words like, you ever heard the saying, always avoid and never use words like always and never? Right? I think that's just good. Always avoid and never use words like always and never. Put off words like lazy, tired, and stupid, and always, never. You never take out the trash. Never. Last year I did. And since we're talking about communication, the nonverbal communication is really important as well. You know what I do? There's not chairs up here. You know, when I in my counseling, like I have two chairs, like I'll sit there, and then I have two chairs that are there. And so what I'll do is I'll put the chairs, pretty close together, but not too close together. And inevitably, when the couple comes in for counseling, if they're not doing well, they'll take those chairs and they'll move them aside, further away from each other. I think, bad week? How'd you know? They're not even close to each other. And then other times, it's like, they just slide their chairs real close to each other. Just nonverbal communication. Sometimes I'll say, tell me about your week. How was your week? The husband says, that was good. That was a good week. And she's over there rolling her eyes. I think, there's something in there. That's nonverbal. So little things like that are really important too. So watch even your nonverbals. The next one here. Put off words that tear down and attack the person, and put on words that build up and attack the problem. Sorry, I'm behind on my slides here. Put on words that build up and attack the problem. Okay, when we love each other, we're careful in what we say, and we're careful in how we say it. And so the last rule of good communication is act, don't react. So be honest, keep current, attack the problem, not the person, and then act, don't react. You see, if you're in the right relationship with God, then it's going to be seen in your actions and your reactions. And so what we need to do is put off communication that's a reaction. And so there's some definitions here that I think you've got on your sheet here. And like bitterness, we talked about that. That's a smoldering resentment. Wrath is more of a flaring outburst of wild rage. Anger is internal smoldering, settled indignation, hostility. It's seeking revenge. Clamor, harsh contentment, or contention, strife, public quarreling, brawling. Slander, speech that injures. Speech that injures. Ongoing defamation of another person that rises from a bitter heart. And then malice is the desire to harm others or see them suffer. And what Paul is saying here is that's the communication that we need to put off. Put off bitterness. Put off wrath. By the way, it doesn't say stop being bitter when they start doing right. Right? Bitterness is a heart issue. He says, put it off. Let it be removed from you. In fact, in Hebrews, it says, don't let that root of bitterness get in there. And so the next one to be here is we want to put on communication that acts correctly. And so we'll define a couple of these here. To be kind. Kindness is to be benevolent or helpful. Right? So we want to put on helpful conversations. To be tenderhearted is to be compassionate and sympathetic. And the last one, forgiving, is to give up your right to revenge or to hold a grudge. And we'll deal with that in our next session. But imagine how different your disagreements would look like if your goal was, at the end, is to be focused on building up and being kind and being tenderhearted and encouraging and being full of grace. Can you talk about difficult things? Absolutely. Should you talk about difficult things? You have to. But you need to talk about them in such a way that you are building up and encouraging one another rather than slamming one another. Imagine if there is no bitterness or anger or malice or clamor in your marriage. It doesn't mean you sweep everything under the rug. It means you deal with it like you actually like each other, that you actually love each other. You see, conflict occurs when each person reacts because it takes two people to argue. And so we want to communicate like two lovers, not two lawyers. We want to communicate with each other in such a way that we actually love each other, not just to win an argument. And so how do you approach difficult conversations? Because you're going to have to do it. And so number one is ask yourself 6 questions. 1, do I have the facts right? Proverbs 18 says, he who gives an answer before he hears, it's folly and shame to him. Make sure you have the facts right. I mean, how many times do we jump the gun and make decisions or debate when we don't have all the facts? So make sure you have the facts right. Number 2, should love hide it? In other words, is it sinful? Is it just a preference? Is it hindering growth? If it's just a preference, give preference to one another in brotherly kindness. That's what Romans says, right? Give preference to one another. 1 Peter 4 says, above all, keep fervent in your love for one another because love covers a multitude of sins. You know, the knock on biblical counselors is that we shoot everything that moves. Right? And so, remember the days at the fair when you'd have those little ducks or whatever going down the road and you'd shoot them? It's like ting, ting, ting. That's the knock on biblical counselors oftentimes, is we shoot everything that moves. You know, here is sin, there is sin, everywhere is sin, sin, boom, 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 and we just deal with all the sin rather than dealing with the heart issues. You don't have to shoot everything that moves. Look for opportunities to love your spouse by covering their sin. Love covers a multitude of sins. Number 3, is my timing right? This is important because nobody wants to walk in the house after a long day and get bombarded with bills and questions and bad children. And if it can wait, then let it wait until there's a better time. Sherry and I dealt with this a number of years ago now, and it was a source of contention. I kind of wanted home to be a refuge, a place where I could just go and relax. And in my work, I mean, I just deal with problems all day long. And so to come home and have to deal with more problems, I just resented it. I didn't like it. And so I didn't even want to come home a lot of times. And so as we worked through this, she understood that, and I think it was her idea. And so here's what she does now. She says something like, hey, listen, at some point tonight, we need to talk about whatever. Whenever you're ready is good for me. Man, that's so nice. I so appreciate that. It allows me to come home. It allows me to relax. It allows me to get ready, and then we can have that conversation. But to get bombarded, and nobody wants that. Man, woman, nobody wants that. Proverbs 15 says, a man has joy in an apt answer, and how delightful is a timely word. A lot of you guys are like me. You just fix problems, or try to fix problems all day long. And so to come home and get bombarded makes you not want to come home. Okay? Make sure your timing is right. Proverbs 15:1 says, a gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. The tongue of the wise makes knowledge acceptable, but the mouth of fools spouts folly. And so we want to know, is my timing right? Number 4, is my attitude right? So you can say the right thing at the right time without the right attitude, and it ain't going to go right. Okay, something's going to go wrong. So watch your attitude so that your words are actually interpreted rightly. Number 5 is, are my words loving? Okay, self-explanatory. Number 6, have I prayed for God's help? Chip Ingram, a number of years ago, I heard him, he had the ABCDE of good communication. And I thought, oh, that's really good. And so here's what he says. Number 1, A here, is ask advice. One of the best ways to honor your spouse is to ask for their advice. And they have opinions. I don't know if you know that or not. But when you ask for their advice, what you're telling them is, I value you. I value what you think. I want input from you into my life. B, brag publicly. It builds people up. They may act shy, and even though we don't want to admit it, it is nice, right? It's nice. I'm not the kind of guy that I like a lot of public praise. You know what I mean? It always feels awkward for me. Like if Sherry were to come up after the seminar's over and she's, don't I have a great husband? I mean, the way he was communicating and stuff, I just got this fantastic. I think, oh, please don't do that. That's so awkward. It's always hard for me, public praise like that. But it's nice. Maybe you guys know Ben Marciano, owner of The Zone. Him and I are good friends, and Ben loves public praise. And I don't say that to his fault. He enjoys it. Danielle, his wife, knows that. And so she does such a good job of publicly praising her husband. So know your husband. Know what how much praise he likes to have, and brag that way about him. And it may be, maybe Sherry's just talking to one of her friends, and then I hear from her friend, man, Sherry was singing your praises the other day in a private conversation. That really builds me up. But for her to come off the stage would be mortifying to me. Because, of course, I'm probably thinking, oh, she's going to share that story that I don't want anybody to know about. So brag publicly. C, compliment often. I have never had anybody come in for marriage where the wife comes in or a couple comes in and they say, he just compliments me too much. Tell him to back off. I'm sick and tired of it. Never had that happen, okay? So when I compliment, I build you up. And that's the purpose that I was given this mouth for, is to build up. D here is directly express gratitude. In other words, thank them specifically for something they've done. Don't say, oh, thanks for just being you. Like, what does that even mean? Thanks for all you do. Specifically, like what do I do? Like, be specific. Directly express gratitude. And then the last one here, exhort sparingly. To exhort means to preach. Nobody just wants to be preached at. Nobody wants to be talked to like they don't understand. Don't make every issue a huge issue. Instead, just ask yourself the question, is what I'm about to say, is it more about me or more about him or her? And if it's about you, keep your mouth shut. And look for something to say that would build up and encourage. And so if your goal is to make them feel as awful as you can about what they've done or what they've said, then there is a real benefit to yelling and belittling and berating them. But if your goal is to love them like Christ loves the church, if your goal is to respect him, then the goal of your conversation should be that by the time we're done, my husband or my wife should feel like I have extended grace and I have encouraged and built him or her up. You see, when I build up, it glorifies God, and when I tear down, it glorifies me. You ever heard the saying, it's better to be thought of as a fool than to open your mouth and remove all doubt. Use words that are wise and healing. All right, let's take, would you guys rather take a long break and finish on time, or take a shorter break and finish early? Shorter break? Nobody ever gets mad at me when we finish early. So let's, it's 11:25 now, so let's be back here at 11:35, and then it should be a pretty quick last session. I think they're out of refreshments over there, and so if you just want to hang out over here, Or if you want to complain to Tony, I'm sure that he would love to hear that as well.